Hello, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar, the next in our series as part of the HealthSpan show. I'm very, very excited for today's discussion. We've got a really great group lined up for you and some excellent conversation to be had. So today's webinar is on the topic of conscious consumption and how to win the trust of health-conscious consumers. With that, I'm very, very pleased to hand over to your moderator, Cyril Filler from Rabobank. Over to you, Cyril.
Hi, well, thank you, Angela. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel on, indeed, as Angela said, the conscious consumption and how to win the trust of the health-conscious consumer. There's a lot to unpack in that sentence, which we will do in the next hour. By the way, I'm standing in my basement, so there's limited headroom, but I love to stand up while presenting and moderating because it provides hopefully some energy to the discussion and also some energy to you. We have a great panel today, a really truly great panel covering all angles that are important for the topic that we're discussing today. So we've got technology here, we've got a small brand here, we have a big food company here focusing actually on the conscious consumer with a separate division. So this is going to be absolutely brilliant, at least that's what my expectation is. Before we go into the topic, I'd like to do a quick round of introductions, including introducing myself towards the end. But first, I'd like to start with Jessica. Jessica, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Jessica Eliassi. I'm part of Mars Edge. We are a new business within Mars Incorporated, focused on better lives through nutrition. And I look after business development and our personalized nutrition strategy. Thank you for having me today.
Fantastic. Jessica, that's really great. And for those that are not familiar, please have a look at what Mars Edge actually is and does, because it may be novel to many, but I think it's a very great initiative that Mars is deploying here. Next up, Tim, I'm just looking at my screen here. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Cyril, and hi to everybody. I'm Tim Allen. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Spoon Guru. Spoon Guru is a technology company that helps grocery retailers to respond to now and next consumer trends. And right now we're really heavily involved in looking at the health and sustainability space and helping our retail partners to meet those needs of their customers.
Great, thank you. So imagine when you go to a website of a retailer, the underlying technology might just be Tim. So that's for your reference. Going to the next one, Martin, please, can you introduce yourself and your company?
Hello, hi there. Thanks for the invitation. Sending you greetings from sunny Prague. And I'm the co-founder and co-owner of the brand Samurai Shot, where we produce natural energy drinks made of pure tea.
Fantastic. And where is it currently available, Martin?
Sorry, say again?
Where is your product available? In which markets?
We are currently mainly available in Czech, in our home country, but we already started some exports. Closest countries, Slovakia, Poland. We do actually have a small distribution started in the UK as well, in Aberdeen and Scotland, and where we also actually founded the website for the UK market. So it's available on the UK market as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Welcome to this panel. And then finally, Luke, please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Luke Niazi here. I'm the Global Managing Director at IBM for the consumer industries. That's both CPG, retail, and agribusiness. Very pleased to be part of the panel here and to share perspectives on kind of the rise of the purpose-driven consumer and how that relates to what we're going to talk about today in terms of the conscious consumers.
Fantastic. I like that a lot, actually, Luke, there, what you said, the purpose-driven consumer. And of course, purpose is on, many more people's minds, especially, partly at least driven by the pandemic. We see large food companies talking about it. We see consumers thinking about it. So hopefully we can touch upon all those points during the discussion. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Cyril Filler. I'm the global strategist at Rabobank. Rabobank is a financial institution that is providing financial solutions from farm to fork. So we are food and agribusiness bank. And I lead the insights group on the consumer part of the insights group that we have. When we're going to unpack the topic, so the conscious consumption and how to win the trust of the consumer, the health conscious consumer. Well, in the preparation, we discussed this and we decided to actually cut it into 3 parts. Let's talk about the conscious consumer. Who is he or she? Let's talk about trust and how actually the consumer can, well, how a company can gain the trust of the consumer. Very important. In the past, of course, this was about brands, but perhaps there's much more around right now, though brands are obviously still very, very important. And when we have unpacked those, we would like to take a look into the future. Because the future of nutrition, we are mostly going to focus on food and beverages. The future of nutrition might just be personalized or might go somewhere else. And that's something that we would like to touch upon as well and see whether there's any, well, ideas that we can plant with you, audience, that you can work on or think about. That's the purpose, of course, of this particular webinar. But let's kick off with well, asking the first question to you, Jessica. The conscious consumer. Who is he or she, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And I think the way that we think about it is that the conscious consumer is a consumer that's been awakened. You know, for us, that means that it's a consumer that's no longer making a purchasing decision on auto drive, but someone who's much more deliberate about the choices that they're making. And, you know, I think when we started Mars Edge, that consumer was a fringe consumer. And what we've seen, and I'm sure my colleagues like Luke will talk about this, is, you know, is that consumer has become far more mainstream. You know, for us, as it relates to food, we think about it as consumers shifting from like mindless eating or default choices to pausing and thinking before their purchases. And the things that they're thinking about are, what are the values I have about my world, about my community, about my family? What are the nutritional needs I have? What are the health goals I have? And how does that product impact that? And, you know, that kind of mindset is fueling things like plant-based eating or locally sourced food, or people paying far more attention to micronutrients than they were doing 5 years ago and definitely 10 years ago. And I think, you know, finally, for us, it's a consumer who's using digital and direct to consumer as a way of better educating themselves. And I think, you know, Tim, you may talk about this as you talk about Spoon Guru, like the ability to equip consumers to get into that, you know, more deliberate, more conscious decision making, in part comes from giving them access to information so that they can dive deeper into what is this product and how does it address those variety of values and needs that I have for myself, for my, you know, and for my family.
Yeah. I love that sentence, Jessica, the awakened consumer. That's something that I will use. I will borrow this one of you because it's a very nice phrase to capture basically what we're talking about. But perhaps, Luke, I can ask you now, because you've done a lot of research on the topic as well at IBM, it's not all consumers, right? What is actually the typical consumer, and what is perhaps the diversity among those consumers?
Yeah, thanks, Cyril. We do a number of annual studies around consumers and consumer behaviors, and you know, we typically do them for the beginning of the year when things like the National Retail Federation come together. And at pre-pandemic, we did a survey looking at behaviors as it relates to conscious choices, so sustainability, living wage conditions, health and wellness. And we saw a really significant shift as we did that, truly around the world, pretty much across all age groups, of a shift to what we term the purpose-driven consumer, but it's the conscious consumer. And convenience as a group was 41% at that point in time, and the purpose-driven consumers were 40%. So that's a massive, you know, almost equalization. But then when you dig into that and you kind of look at the different characteristics of sustainability or health and wellness in particular, pre-pandemic, 46% of the group felt it was very important, and a further 31% found that it was moderately important. We then did a survey in September, kind of, you know, 9 months into the pandemic, and we saw a 23% rise in the scoring as it relates to significantly important. What's interesting as well is when you look around the world, that rise, it was particularly high in countries like China and India, amongst others. When you looked at you know, the kind of Western economies within Europe or the US, we saw that rise too, but not to the same extent. They were still a little bit behind. But countries like in Europe, like Spain and Italy, particularly affected by the pandemic, again, very high rise and increase about concerns about health and wellness, and we can unpack that later on.
Yes, okay, great. Those are impressive statistics, and I'm very interested, and we may touch upon that later on as well, that the rise that you mentioned in China and India. So there's perhaps some sort of catch-up going on, who knows, or at least an increased interest. Well, definitely an increased interest.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I think it's an acceleration,
Yes.
but also it's the nature of how digitally aware and digitally engaged those consumer groups are, and they are connecting with how you bring this together, of course, down to the consumers, often in a digital experience in the end, and so they're much more digitally connected, and they're going things digitally first, and so they're probably the fastest growth area that we see.
Yeah. Tim, over to you. You did also work in understanding the consumer, especially on the nutrition side of things, given that that's the expertise of your company. And you did a survey in the UK. Can you give us the highlights there on the deltas that you're seeing, and perhaps the increased awareness or awakening, to quote Jessica here, of the consumer?
Yeah, sure. We similarly did a research, and we did it in conjunction with PwC and Google, pre-pandemic and during, and we were actually gearing it up for a pre-pandemic. Then the pandemic happened. We thought this is a great opportunity to now compare that data later on. And similarly, we did a survey in December 19, and then in October 2020, and we saw some real shifts. Obviously there's a huge upswing in e-com, in the use of e-com, and some of those demographics that weren't previously using e-com so much, the over 55 group, for example, have now accelerated and now really engaged with it. And the survey indicated that sort of post-pandemic, that's going to be a permanent shift to a certain level. Accelerator's going to stay there because of the convenience that brings, but also in terms of the nutrition and the reasons for changing diet. That was also really interesting. So we saw that in the 5 years prior to the pandemic, 59% of people said that during that 5-year period, they'd changed their diet for some reason. Then between December and October 2020, during the pandemic, 29% people said they changed their diet. So you compare that 5 years for 59% to 9 months on 29%, it's a huge upswing. And some of there's been a real shift in the reasoning for that. Typically people, really the leading reason for changing diet has been health and being overweight. It's about losing weight. It's trying to cut down calories and sugar. But what we saw in the pandemic was that the cutting down of sugar reduced a little bit and was replaced by more health conscious eating. So fruit and vegetable has gone from 26% of people saying that was the reason to 40%. Is a huge upswing. Yeah. And then also things like immunity, trying to look at immunity, and mental and physical well-being were also rising up, and things like sort of more diets around sort of weight and weight loss were coming down a bit, and perhaps it's explained somehow by the fact that people were also looking to comfort eat during the pandemic. So there was an uplift in searches for things like biscuits, whilst at the same time vegetables. So it really was changing. I think this indicates the nature of the conscious consumer for us, in that there's a constant flow of influences, constant flow of interests, and they're constantly changing. So, the industry needs to really understand that, and understand it's not a fixed thing. It's something that constantly moves for the individual as well as across demographics. And I think the other sort of thing around the conscious consumer we noted is it's very hard sometimes for that conscious consumer to turn that belief and that value into action and behavior, because they'll walk into a supermarket, for example, not know which things are matching to their particular set of beliefs and values. So that's an opportunity there for the industry to get behind.
I'll park that one, because we'll get back to that one, because the consumer may not be able to do it on his or her own, but we'll come to that. The other thing that you mentioned, and again, in my role, I talked to many food companies, whereas in the past few years, it was about leaving out certain ingredients like sugar. it now actually may become a story of adding certain ingredients for fortification purposes, for example. So I think that's a very interesting, perhaps some may see it as small, but I think it's an interesting change that we're seeing. I'd like to talk about from a real life point of view, and that is from in the Czech Republic, how you are seeing behavior for your client base. So are they really consciously picking your product out over coffee or alcoholic drinks? Is there a conscious mindset change that you're seeing there? Mark?
Yeah, we definitely are. Very interesting so far, all the comments. I'm very keen to listen to that. We don't have so much of a scientific or research side. We have the kind of practical and selling side. We started 5 years ago. That time, even the funny thing about our drink is that we drink it as a shot. So we started with a non-alcoholic shot, which serves as an energy drink. So it's two actually novelties in one. And that time, those 4 or 5 years ago, people in bars was a different time, of course, before pandemic and everything running. And it was more of a like joke. What is it? Like non-alcoholic shot, even in Czech, it's pretty like uncommon. So we had this, let's say, struggle. At the same time, when we break the first like what is it, then people, if they kind of understood or listened to what it is and tasted, they were very nicely surprised, and the feedback is very positive and very good. And since then we are growing every year, and the pandemic, I would even say, boosted it a little bit also because of the growth of e-commerce, but it's a different story. So we definitely see the shift in consumers' preferences for more conscious on more healthy things, meaning in general, food and drinks itself. Energy drink world is very, let's say, full of sugar and chemicals, which still will probably last. It's not like a quick move to be changing from one day, but we definitely see the shift towards what people like about it. The thing it's less sugar or no sugar, because we have more different varieties. And sometimes it's even funny because people, if you ask them, they would of course prefer no sugar or very low sugar, but when it comes to tasting, they very often like the sweetened kinds. So it's a difference between what do you wanna reply and what is your preference in the end of the day. So it's funny to watch that, but we definitely see the shift towards let's say natural products itself.
Okay, I think that's a common thread here, that mindset change is indeed happening across the globe. And I think that's very important. By the way, for those who are watching live now, it's the 18th of March. You can put your questions into the Q&A box or in the chat box if you would like to ask a question. Already a question came in. I'll touch upon that later on. But first, I would like to follow up on what Tim just said, because I think that is very interesting. Is the consumer actually capable and able to move to a more healthier lifestyle on its own? Because it may be there, the consciousness may be there, the awakening may be happening, but acting is another thing. So anyone would like to comment on that? Perhaps Tim, you would like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So it's this is the space in which we work, so we see a lot of it, and our mission really is to make it frictionless for those conscious consumers to find the right products, and at the same time helping our retail partners to meet those needs of their shoppers. What is really interesting in our study was that education is a real barrier, and education in the sense of people really, if you take health for example, really understanding what's healthy, because it's so confusing. So many multiple messages out there in the world that it can be very, very confusing for people to really understand what is healthy for them. But then secondarily is an educational element around the products themselves at product level. So does that product meet my health needs? Yeah. And so we really are very involved in that second element. And what we found in the survey we did was that people were going to Google for the answer. They were going to looking at things like BBC Good Food for recipes that they thought were healthy. They weren't going to grocery retailers or to CPGs. Yeah. Now, there's an enormous opportunity, we feel, that, to build trust, and we were talking about trust as well in this conversation, for the CPG industry and the supermarket grocery industry to start to help educate their customers around what's good for the planet, what's good for sustainability, but also what's good for their individual health.
Yeah. No, and does that all need to be science-based, Tim, or anyone else, that education?
Say that again.
Whether that it needs to be science-based. I talked to one of the larger food companies in the world, and they were making the comment to me early this week, actually, saying we are going to shift from not necessarily the consumer is king to much more a science-based, slightly activism type of approach. That's new. And is this something that you, probably Jessica, perhaps you can jump in?
I'm happy to chime in. I mean, I think if you're looking to build trust and not momentary trust, but I know one of the questions that came in is this a lasting trend? You know, is this a lasting trend post-COVID? You know, the way that we think about it is that you need to be evidence-based and consumer-led. And the reason for that is, you know, if the rhetoric doesn't match the reality, if you're out there making big grandiose promises to consumers, but it doesn't work. You know, today's conscious consumer is not going to stand for that. I mean, they're going to do their own work. And just because you say it, they're not going to take you at face value. They're going to do their own work. They're going to, you know, educate themselves, whether they're doing that, as Tim says, through Google or whoever their group of trusted advisors is. And that group of trusted advisors has dramatically changed over the past few years. You know, health has kind of gone from a conversation I'm having with my doctor to a conversation I'm having in, you know, social communities, you know, in social media. And so that we look at this as like, it has to be consumer-led. It has to be made relevant to a consumer's life. It can't feel like science. It can't feel overbearing, but it needs to be evident. You know, there needs to be evidence. There needs to be proof that it works, because otherwise, you know, that trust gets broken very quickly. And I think today's conscious consumer is just too discerning and deliberate in those choices.
And Cyril, if I can just add on to Tim and Jessica's points there, you know, this point around you know, evidence of the things that you say that you're doing in your food value chain is such an important piece. You know, again, just using the data, pre-COVID, about 38% of people surveyed said that they thought it was very important. That grew by about 23% also to 48% during COVID. But if you talk about, you know, how do you actually live the brand values, what you've got to demonstrate is that in the point of consumption, in that consumer experience, you've got to be able to demonstrate that the things that you say that you're doing, whether it's about CO2 footprint or whether it's about water or whether it's about the health and wellness of your food, is truly available to the consumer in that buying experience. Now, the reality is we can do that nowadays. You can scan the QR code and you can see all of the information about you know, basic food products as they've come through the food value chain. It's much easier to do that, you know, with fresh fruit and, you know, fresh vegetables and fresh meat and fish and other kind of single source products. It becomes a bit more complex when you have combinational products to be able to demonstrate all of the way that through the value chain. So if you've got, you know, manufactured products, but it's absolutely becoming the intent. And those who are leading in this field, whether it's a CPG company or it's a food producer farming cooperative, or it's a retailer, they're really putting this information in the hands of the consumer, you know, during and at the time of the buying experience.
Yeah. So that is one way to to achieve trust, and that is, I think, a segue into indeed the next section. As I outlined in the beginning, there's three parts of this discussion. So we define the conscious consumer here. Let's indeed go deeper into trust, because the consumer wants to trust, well, something, whether that's a brand or an institution, to make those decisions that are good for them. But also the other question was, can you keep that trust, or will that trust go away as quickly as possible? So first, perhaps I'd like to start with Martin here. So you have a particular brand which is aimed at, well, let's call it the conscious consumer who wants to replace certain product with something else which provides them energy and a boost. have you got any insights on the trust of your consumers in your brand in particular, or for example through recurring purchases?
Mm. I would say yes, because since we go from the very beginning, we see how people react on it, how they come back, and how they also refer to others, to their peers, family, friends, or colleagues. So we see how, of course, important is to build the trust, and I think the main thing here is to build it on authenticity, because either you are a huge company and you have a budget to make the impression somehow spread around and big, which of course can be also authentic, or you just show it by doing it yourself, and doing it slowly and continuously, and building on what's the main and like major thing for you.
Yeah.
So we started with this because we see there is no such a product. We founded it with a colleague of mine who's one of the biggest expert in tea in Czech Republic. He's actually one of the only European in the tea world union. And so the way was from bringing or bridging the gap between real and high quality tea and the mainstream. Yeah. It wasn't the goal wasn't like to do something which is not there yet and let's try to sell it for being a non-alcoholic shot, but we saw how niche is the market of brand or leaf tea, the pure tea, just for the experts, and then the mainstream who's drinking, let's say, the very low quality of hot drinks, including teas. So there's a huge space, and we're just trying to show to the mainstream how because the effect of the tea is totally, it's, I would say, even a little bit unknown compared to how common and how spread around the tea is very, very unknown what really tea does in its pure and let's say strong extract version. So it's sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah. So it's very nice to see, and we, as said before, we build it from the very beginning, from the zero, and we mainly build it on the authenticity, and that's the way we trust it goes.
Can we, and Jessica, I'd like to involve you here because you've been with Mars for a long time, I know. Do you see that sort of the brand values that are going to be communicated, that are being communicated, are changing because of the conscious consumer and building that trust there? So it's not necessarily just about, a Mars bar per se and what it shows, but there's much more behind it. Do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I work for Mars Edge, which is our startup within a large company. But I think, just to speak to it overall, I'd say, the idea of a brands were created as a way of creating trust, right? And 100 years ago, you as a brand owner defined what your brand was, and you used that to communicate trust to consumers. I think what's been happening, especially with the conscious consumer, is that the conscious consumer is helping to define or inputting in the definition of what your brand is. So you no longer, as a brand owner, fully own what your brand means, but you're almost co-creating what your brand means together with your consumer. I think, Mars and Mars Edge, like we definitely look at some clear values behind our brands and behind what we are looking to communicate to the consumers. And that's why being evidence-based is important to us and, creating that contract. But I think we also recognize that the consumer is part of that, conversation, and that the best way to create a brand in today's world is to do that together with the consumer. And back to your original question around building trust, I think one of the things we think a lot about within Mars Edge, and we made a majority stake investment in a German-based nutrition company about 18 months or so ago called FoodSpring, and FoodSpring is focused on what they call the finest fitness foods. And one of the things, that I've been very inspired about is how the way they connect with consumers is not just on transactions. So they've built an entire platform to extend that relationship with consumers, right? So they have a content site where they provide recipes that don't always include their products. They provide, workouts on social media. There's a whole brand and lifestyle brand that's been created that's not just about transaction. And I think it's really important that the consumer doesn't always feel that your entire relationship with them is just about getting them to buy something, but that you're actually creating a lifelong connection with them that brings value to them. And especially if you're going to be a brand in the health space, I think you have to think about what's the value that I'm bringing to the consumer on their health journey, because it is a journey. And it really isn't about just that one transaction. It's about a lifelong relationship with the consumer.
Yeah, no, fully agree with you. Tim, I would like to take this to the retailer, because we just talked from two branded food companies to trust, but retailers are competing to a degree at least for the same type of trust. And some retailers, definitely not all, but some retailers are focusing on health, nutrition, perhaps broader sustainability measures like carbon emissions as well. But let's focus on nutrition here. They're focusing on that, and that's where your tool comes in. What do you see that what retailers are trying to do around that trust?
No, it's a really obviously an important question, and I think, you know, echoing what Jessica says, there's an opportunity to go beyond just that simple transaction, and you can do that probably in a couple of ways. One is to provide advised content education that's science-based, that's credible, and that goes to, you know, providing maybe some recipes, providing some health information that goes beyond just selling products. But also I think there's a sort of element of consistency and authenticity to the message. And, you know, where we're playing is, you know, in the technology field. And what we're seeing is that, you know, a consumer obviously has multiple touch points with a retailer. And that's before they buy, it's during the shopping experience, it's after they buy. And if you can be consistent with your message and your values throughout the entire journey, you know, you're starting to build that trust and that brand messaging. And it can become, you know, through recommendations, it can be in-store prompts when you're on your mobile phone. We know you, we know you're, you know, looking after your health, look in aisle 3, there's something that really would suit you. And I think it's also another element of getting really close to the consumer and customer is vital. You know, customers now have nuanced needs. They're used to using Netflix or YouTube, that is absolutely brilliant at honing their content to your personal requirements. And people expect that through a digital interaction. And so it's about really understanding your consumer and genuinely providing them with recommendations and maybe wider content that is absolutely suited to their individual needs.
I'll come to one of the questions that has been asked in the Q&A box after the one I'm asking to look here, and that is, what is the role that technology can play in rebuilding this trust? So apart what Spoon Guru is doing in providing the platform, there's tons of technology. And you talked about the supply chain beforehand. What can technology all bring?
Well, the reality is that technology can apply in every point in the food production and supply chain and consumption experience. You know, we're able with digital farming techniques to be able to look at where the land is being farmed effectively, making sure that, you know, the amount of nutrients that go into the land is appropriate and it's not over farmed, and that has an effect on CO2, water, and other measures. We are able to you know, track farm to fork traceability of food, and I use farm to fork, but it could be from a sea to a fork as well, you know, and that's really about looking at things like safety conditions and how food is being produced, and is it truly organic? So and that's, you know, not only about kind of being kind of responsible farming and responsible production, but it's also about kind of genuine and authenticity. So, for example, there's still a lot of you know, grey products on the market that get distorted as they go through the supply chain. And so, if you want to prove that your virgin olive oil is truly organically grown virgin olive oil, you can use it for that benefit, as an example, as some companies are doing. So you can provide it there. You can look at the application of technology in manufacturing facilities to see how, you know, water is used, how energy is used efficiently. And of course, those same techniques can be applied to transportation and logistics, and can be applied to the retail environment in terms of the CO2 footprint, energy usage, etc., of those environments. So it is possible, and of course it's accelerating, to be able to track things through the entirety of the value chain. And companies now are doing that, Walmarts and the Carrefours of this world in terms of big retailers, but also many organic food producers are doing this to demonstrate that they are producing produce that is better made and is safe and is more sustainable. Now, the question in the chat actually is, well, is that kind of agenda that we're seeing around sustainable food production being applied all the way through to the wellness agenda? And I would say kind of not yet. We're still at a fairly nascent capability. Can we do it? Absolutely, can we do it? But the examples that I've explained in terms of sustainable supply chains, that is not adopted at scale. That is not adopted at scale, and so there's quite a journey yet to get that kind of capability in the food value chain. And then once that's been kind of experienced, I think the wellness piece will accelerate off the back of that as well.
Great. Before we go into looking in the future, there's one other question in the Q&A that I would like to raise with you, and that is, and we talked about it a bit before, the evidence-based trust based on evidence, based on science. And does science need to be simplified, and how? And when I saw the question, I was thinking about the concept that's going to be introduced in many countries here in Europe, is already introduced to some extent on packaged food, which is Nutri-Score, which is the food labeling on the nutritional side, which A is a good score, E is a bad score, and there's an interesting calculation behind it, which some people believe in and others don't. But it is a simplified way of looking at science. Is this something that you see as well? Well, perhaps Tim, because there's a lot of science going into what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nutri-Score is a brilliant one, and so we obviously look very deeply at these things. I think when you take the science of health or the science of sustainability, it's such a multifaceted, complicated, difficult and personalized thing. So I have to try and build a standard around that applies broadly to everybody. It's a really tough task. And, absolutely amazing that Nutri-Score and the Public Health Organization in France has been able to do something around that. It's never going to be perfect. And, we look at it and we find holes in it because we're very, very detailed about how we look at things. However, broadly, it's moving things in the right direction. And, any sort of help that is simplified and that moves directionally in the right direction, then, that's really helpful. I think ultimately, though, what it really will ultimately come down to is a personalized score. Yeah. Tell us what your personal requirements are, and we will create a score for you that enables you to find the most relevant foods. And, because health for one person is not health for another. We all have different sort of conditions, different life stages and different needs. So I think ultimately we're going to get to a personalized level, but Nutri-Score is helpful in the meantime.
Which is a brilliant bridge, Tim. It looks like we prepared it, which we haven't, but to the next session, and that is the future of nutrition, of which personalization might just become a very important one. We've seen a lot of initiatives over the last few years. For example, that you would have a swab done, and then your DNA would be determined, and on the basis of the DNA, you would get some sort of advice on what type of nutrition would fit for your body. Being challenges around that as well on that particular idea. We've seen a few of these ideas coming and going. Many still see personalized nutrition as the holy grail. Let's start with Jessica. Do you believe it is?
I think the way that we think about personalized nutrition is a way of making nutrition relevant to consumers. And I think that really has to start with the consumer and their needs, and not the cool technology or the cool solution and the industry needs. And I think that's what's starting to change, is thinking about personalization as a way to empower consumers. I love, Tim, what you were just saying, which is, we like to talk about it as my food for my body in my context. That's like my little strap line for personalized nutrition, because it really is about my individual food likes and dislikes, my individual health goals and nutritional needs, and the way I live my life, whether that's convenience, as Luke was touching on earlier, or whatever other element that defines my context. I mean, I think I'm, as I shared with you, my role and my scope cover personalized nutrition. So I'm, super eager and passionate about this space. But I think we're also incredibly discerning on what are the solutions that make sense. What are the things that actually make a difference in personalization? What is that? Is that DNA? Is it some other biomarker that we should be looking at? But ultimately, as I started with, it is about driving relevance and giving the consumers something that can empower them to make a more informed and more relevant choice for themselves.
So personalized nutrition is more than just nutrition for you. It's also communication and building that trust, going back to the previous topic as well. So
yeah,
Mark,
no, for sure. I mean, I think when personalized nutrition started, there was this vision of getting to N of one food, right? Like I'm going to have my own created meal, and it's going to be made just for me. And I'm not saying that won't happen over time, but I think we think about personalized nutrition around personalizing the experience.
Yeah.
And the nutrition aspect is, it's around finding things that address your nutritional needs. It doesn't have to be that the product is personalized. Matchmaking you, like as Tim was describing, helping you find what you need for your needs is one of the bigger friction points that exist today. And I think one of the things we think about when we think about consumer friction points and why personalization I think is exciting is right now it's super siloed, right? So I may be a conscious consumer and I want to make these choices, but there's still a ton of friction. It's much easier now, by the way, in COVID, when I'm at home and I can do whatever I need to do in my home. But the second we all start opening back up and going back into travel and back into offices and being much more on the go, the ability to get that personalized experience becomes even more important, because it's easy to do when you can control when you can control all the things that you're using to create that experience. It's much harder to do when you have to rely on others. And I think that's where the big opportunity will come in the next few years.
from a product point of view, Martin, because your ideal goal is of course to scale up and to become big and have large volumes, which is exactly, well, to a degree at least, the opposite of personalized nutrition, but perhaps not that different from the way that Jessica explained it. Because if you can tailor it to everybody's personal experience, it may work. So what's your thinking there?
Very true, very true, and definitely agree with what Jessica said. I would just, if you don't mind, switch it a little bit for also a different point of view, which means, let's say, self-awareness of the consumer, because I think what was said is very true and very scientific. At the same time, people should know, and I actually think they know more. They are aware of themselves. Very often they don't do it. So I would just hope or emphasize more for taking time, maybe thinking about this more, meaning what do I really like, what do I don't like, because there's many data, many things written, many nutritions everywhere, and people just know more of what they really feel like, or what really helps them or doesn't. So I would stress out a little bit more not only what it is in the personalized way, but also what amount, because it also, you can, meaning if you eat too much of healthy stuff, it won't be probably very good for you. So just a little bit different point of view. Not that I wouldn't agree, I totally agree what was said, but also moving into thinking more about myself personally. What do I like, what do I don't like, and if it's fit within these let's say personalized nutrition data, then just take more time to actually observe it and kind of play with it, and starting with the low and adding, rather than having too much of good stuff. That's
Tim, go ahead, please. You wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that, and it's certainly something we see in practice, because when you start to apply some of these things in real life, you soon realize that behavioral science comes in, and telling somebody who's on a shopping journey to buy a candy bar that you'd be healthier if you ate an apple is never going to work. People won't switch that. But helping them to achieve their sort of overriding goal of trying to be a bit healthier, to show them a candy bar that's got slightly less sugar or salt or fat in it is moving them and nudging them into a sort of more healthy world. And it's really important to understand from customer experience and consumer behavior perspective that you can't just, you know, take huge leaps. It's all about nudging the population towards slightly better informed choices and helping them to fulfill on those overriding beliefs that they have.
Yeah, yeah, I really agree with that, Tim. And you know, if you know, I'm sure if we look around us, we probably all have one of these on our wrists or something like that. You know, 10 years ago, we weren't wearing one of these on our wrists, and we weren't counting our steps, and we weren't tracking our hours, and we weren't tracking our sleep patterns. Not that everybody's doing it, but it's becoming more prevalent in terms of I've got my personal kind of monitor of my fitness, and that's increasing. And I think there's such an opportunity if we can surface the information of nutritional value more readily, and then start to connect some of these experiences together. I think that you've got a you know, a real chance to influence. However, you know, when you are shopping online and you've made your online orders of whichever retailer you happen to buy from, you get the basket, you get your loyalty points information, you know the price. But do you get a summary of your nutritional content at this point in time? You don't. Now, the information, as we've discussed, can be made throughout the value chain, but we've got to make it more accessible to people to to get and understand on a regular basis, and then connect it, in the way that we are starting to connect to things like sports and activity applications.
Now, the interesting challenge there, Luke, is of course to connect all the inputs and all the food that you eat in one sort of system. Because some of the retailers, and Tim might know this as well, or others as well, are trying to do this. I think Kroger has an app where on the entire shopping basket you get a score, and even with suggestions that then you buying this, but actually you should be buying that for a healthier lifestyle. But that's still that shopping basket, which A, applies to your entire family, and B, is only a few of your eating occasions during the week. So there's, I think, one of the big challenges to solve there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that, isn't it? And I think it depends on what perspective you're taking, because, if you're taking a view from a population level, and you've got an obligation like a government to improve health of a population or improve the planet's health through reducing carbon footprint, etc. Looking at a basket and small nudges that are making, perhaps for the individual, a small number of changes, when multiplied across the population, baskets and then the whole population, can start to make a significant difference. So I think it also depends on the perspective and what the objective is. And we've seen that we're launching something later this year which does exactly what Luke was suggesting, and it gives people a readout of the nutritional value of their basket, and it matches that to their personal health goals. And we're doing this with a big retailer, so we're excited. I think it'd be, the package would be a new thing, but it'll be interesting to see how customers respond to that. And, is that information going to help them to pay more attention to their health goals and make it easier and frictionless for them to start making a difference?
Okay, there's a question in the Q&A, and that is, doesn't cultural diversity play a role also? And this talks a bit to the geographical stuff that we touched upon in the beginning. So when you think about the future of nutrition, is there a difference between, the US and Asia? I think the answer is yes, but to what extent and how can technology or companies help in achieving a certain goal? Anyone who would like to tackle that?
Well, I was just going, because I've got, obviously there's a lot of data points, and I can't remember all the numbers. I was just going back to look at my kind of statistics on health and wellness, and versus populations. And so, as I said, emerging countries like India, 76%, parts of Africa, 65%, in terms of caring about health and wellness. When you looked at the data for the US data was actually only 38% felt that it was significantly important comparatively. And as I said, within Europe, unfortunately, I'm in the UK and we're not particularly good. We're only at 40% thought it was significantly important. But countries like Spain and Italy were up at 62 and 64%. So there is such a big kind of diversity in kind of how lifestyles and natures in countries around the world kind of take this, and so it's not going to develop at the same rate and pace around the world. It's going to be very, very different. If you come from, for example, Mediterranean countries where there's a Mediterranean kind of diet and perspective, there's going to be a greater interest than perhaps some of the other countries. But it's like some of the questions that have also been put in the chat. This is a wave that is coming, and over time, more and more of the global population will become kind of connected to, aware of, and want to make choices of it. But it's a gradual thing. It's a gradual thing. But there is quite significant geographic differences. And back to the demographic point, actually the two groups that are most focused on this right now are the Gen X and the millennials. You find actually the baby boomers and the Gen Z are slightly less focused on it right now. So that's interesting too.
Yeah, the latter group surprises me quite a bit, given that they tend to be focused on sustainability issues in general. At least that's what other research tells.
Yeah, it's not a massive difference, Cyril. It's kind of again, I'm talking about those that are considered to be very important, but the Gen X and the millennials are up close to 50%, whereas the Z and the baby boomers at around 40%. That is a 20% difference, in that group, but it's that kind of range.
The only thing I was going to build is that I think one of the things we've seen as we've looked at different geographies is maybe touching on what Tim was saying at the beginning, that I think in the more developed markets, the focus on nutrition is very highly connected to weight and weight management.
Yes.
Whereas in other geographies, especially in cultures where food has long had a relationship with health, where there's a much closer connection between what you eat and how it makes you feel. There's quite a different relationship with nutrition, which may be less about weight management and maybe more about addressing other nutritional needs or health needs like vitamin deficiencies and things like that. And so I think it does look quite different between what we're used to seeing in the more developed markets and perhaps in some of the other geographies around the world. Also, just the consumer adoption is quite different, I think, based on the relationship between how you view food.
Yeah, we also seen a regional difference, so in our study of the UK, we saw that there were big differences between the reasons for changing diet from London versus Northwest, for example, and it's quite a lot. There are big percentage point differences between what's driving those changes. So I think it's it's certainly different at all levels, and the industry needs to understand that and to be able to be flexible enough to meet those needs, I think, at whichever level.
Provide a personalized experience that Jessica was talking about. So fully agree. I see we have 5 minutes left, and I would like to wrap up with one final comment from each of you on the question, and I think this is on many people's minds. We've seen all sorts of changes during the pandemic, and we've seen a lot of big trends emerging. But what is the one thing within nutrition or health and well-being that you that you think will stay, that will be around it for the next 3 to 5 years? So let's start with you, Jessica. What would be for you the one key one?
I think it's, empowered fitness. So people, being able to do fitness at home on their own terms and creating their own social, communities around that. I think that that's a big trend that's going to stay with us, and that I think will better connect consumers to nutrition. Because I think once you get into fitness, the next level of that conversation quickly becomes nutrition.
So to give an example, then, would you mean what Peloton is doing, or what other companies?
Yeah, I think Peloton, Zwift, Strava, people with YouTube content. There's just fitness has moved from something that's for the elites to something that's now much more easily available and accessible. And, you know, I think there's various versions of that, whether it's, you know, spending a few dollars a month to use Peloton or a few $1,000s, but I think it's really opens the accessibility of that space and, you know, made it so that you don't have to go to a gym and spend 3 hours to feel like you're doing something for your health.
Yes. Okay, great. Empowered fitness. Great one line. Go ahead, Tim. What's your one final trend that will stick in your belief?
I think really what's going to be important is creating actionable insights. And, you know, the industry needs to develop actionable insights to meet those consumer needs. And I think going forward, it's in a data-driven world that needs to be embraced right across the supply chain. Really, Luke was talking about earlier, and it has to be end-to-end. And the actionable insight is going to be what meets those particular needs.
And that's going to stick in your view, because we've seen more of those, but now to make them actionable is probably the next step. Is that the way to see it? But
yeah.
Hey, Martin, and for you, what is the big trend change, step change perhaps, that you've seen that you will believe is going to stick post-pandemic?
I think the big boost of the e-commerce and the electronic groceries itself, it was very, you can see it very well here, and I think this was something that made the shift, which will there's the kind of jump that will stay there, and since then will keep growing. So I think this is the trend that was boosted and will still stay very strong, and will impact on people how they will actually shop and what they will shop by the electronic or e-commerce. Of course, then a lot of following things. What will be the ways of how to get the information, how to order, how to deliver, etc. But the e-commerce itself, it's a big boost, and I think it will still go on.
Very good. And Luke, you're the last one here.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of the comments of my fellow panelists. I agree with Jess's comment, I agree with Tim's comment, and I agree with Martin's comment. To add a different perspective, I think thoughtful sourcing. I think we've changed our sourcing parameters, and we've become much more aware of where things come from. And therefore, that thoughtful sourcing, when you expand it, will be about sustainable food supply chains. And with that evidence and that traceability of sustainable food supply chains, we get to the ability to deliver clear understanding of the nutrients and the health and wellness of what's going into the supply chain. So thoughtful sourcing as it relates to me, the consumer, the conscious consumer.
Okay, well, it's time to wrap up. We've discussed the 3 topics that we set out on the beginning. So we defined the conscious consumer. We talked a lot about trust, and we talked a bit about the future as well, especially about personalized nutrition. And we had some tangents here and there. I thought it was a brilliant discussion, and hope the audience thought so as well. So we would like to thank Jessica, Tim, Martin, and Luke for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then I'll hand over to Angela to wrap it up on her end.
And thank you, Cyril, for an excellent discussion and really, really wonderful moderating. Thank you also to all of you who were listening. If, like me, you feel incredibly privileged to have listened to such a thoughtful and insightful conversation, I'd love for you to join us at our HealthSpan show in May. It's free to attend. I've just put a link into the chat. Please sign up. Our panelists will be back. This discussion will be available for you to rewatch if you want to, but also loads more conversation along these themes. So we'd love to see you there. But once again, thank you so much to our panel for a really great discussion, and goodbye.